You alluded a little bit to the transformation that's going on at the broader Broadcasting Board of Governors, but what's that transformation going to mean to Voice of America specifically? And we've heard a little bit about them phasing out some of the Chinese services, Croatian services. Why are those changes being made? Many Americans looked at the Arab Spring and saw that the real media force there were private things like Facebook and Twitter that was accomplishing many of the ostensible goals of things like Voice of America. Given that, why should the taxpayer keep paying the same size budget for something like Voice of America and other Broadcasting Board of Governors projects? So here in the U.S., we of course by law can't consume Voice of America, but you've spent a lot of your career overseas, most recently at the U.S. Embassy in Kabul. How did people perceive Voice of America in the countries where you have worked as a journalist and as a diplomat? And at the same time, there are so many other foreign government-owned media that have set up shop here in the U.S. in the last few years. France 24, Al Jazeera, Russia Today. Just recently, China's CCTV is starting something here in D.C. How does VOA compete in this scrum? And do you see it doing kind of the same kinds of things as these other foreign-owned media? A couple years ago, the Government Accountability Office issued a pretty critical report about the Broadcasting Board of Governors in general, of which VOA is a part, and complained that despite having spent $10 billion since September 11th, negative views of the U.S. still persist in foreign polling. Why do you think that is? And have you seen any signs to suggest in the last couple of years that that's turning a corner in any way? And part of the criticism from that report was that there were not good definitions of success for BBG and for VOA. How would you define success for VOA at the moment? Increasingly, the Defense Department has been getting into the media business, running its own news services in places like North Africa. How appropriate do you think that is, given that this is typically the bailiwick of the State Department? And how do you plan to coordinate with this to make sure there isn't overlap or conflicting messaging in some way? How committed is the Obama administration to VOA and the general notion of public diplomacy compared to previous administrations, in your experience? And where do you think is the most fertile place for what VOA does in today's world? So as we saw from that clip, there were definite risks that Al Hurra journalists were facing during the Arab Spring. What kind of presence did Al Hurra and Al Sawa have on the ground when these uprisings were happening in Libya, Tunisia, Cairo, etc.? And when the organizations were created, it was really in the darkest days of the Iraq War, right around 2004, when Al Hurra and Al Sawa were put together. And from everything that I've read, it seemed like it was really a reaction to other Arabic news channels like Al Jazeera, who I think American officials felt were kind of smearing the United States in their broadcasts. Since then, the brand of Al Jazeera has begun to be received really differently in the United States. How would you differentiate Al Sawa and Al Hurra and Radio Sawa's message from the Al Jazeera message? And how do you deal with the incredibly fraught topic of Israel and the Palestinian territories when you know that your audience is going to be largely incredibly critical of what American policy is? Do you carry some of this criticism in your broadcasts? And has the Arab Spring changed your editorial priorities at all? Will Al Hurra keep its separate channel in Iraq after the troops leave? Al Hurra has come under fire in the past, both for running Hezbollah speeches and for employing top executives that didn't know Arabic or weren't really familiar with Arabic media. I think both of those show the difficult needle that Al Hurra is trying to thread. It's a difficult path. How do you find your talent, and how do you make sure that they don't fall on either side of that tricky path? Mr. Conniff, the umbrella organization, the Broadcasting Board of Governors, is in the midst of rethinking the whole structure of all of those U.S.-backed media organizations, maybe centralizing them. There's been talk of, a central CNN brain that would be behind all of them. I know it's early days, but how are those moves likely to affect Al Hurra and Radio Sawa? You had mentioned that you're using social media for promoting the channels themselves, but how much are you using social media to actually get the news out? Because that is part of the larger changes that Walter Isaacson, the chairman of the BBG, is talking about.